Hi, Kyle McMaster here with McMaster Robots, and today we are going to be weathering one of these Wally treads here. This is cast out of urethane rubber. And so what we're going to be using today is I bought this little cheap dollar makeup brush from CVS. I find this is really nice for dry brushing. And then we're going to be using these paints today. So I'm going to start out with this kind of, what do they call it, warm buff. It's kind of a beige, kind of a sandy beige that I got at Walmart. And then we also got this at Walmart. It's just, they call it real brown. It's sometimes you call it flat brown or normal brown. But yeah, we're just going to use these two here, and we're going to get some nice weathering on these. So to start out with, I'm going to take my beige. After shaking it up, I'm just going to put it on my palette. And then we're just going to take our brush here, we're just going to load it up by just kind of dipping it in. And we're just going to kind of tap it down here so I don't have too much on my brush, but just enough to kind of pat it on here. And so I'm just going to start by patting it on here. And because I'm not really using any primer on this, it's just raw rubber underneath, I'm going to be real careful not to smear it or do anything like that, just because until it fully dries, it's kind of, it gets a little messy. And so I found that if I just sort of put it on nice and heavy here by just sort of tapping it on, it gives a nice little effect where you can kind of see a little bit of the rubber underneath. And then it gets a nice covering on it without smearing it. And I try to get the sides here as well. And don't worry if you get a little messy, because it's supposed to look messy. That's kind of the nice thing about weathering. And so I'll just kind of work around each of these hinges. Notice I'm starting with the hinges here because I actually don't want as much paint on the brush when I eventually get to weathering the rest of it. And so here I'm just going to work my way around. Okay. And then I'll go to the other side here, just load my brush up again. And don't worry if it's heavier in some spots versus others. This isn't like a normal paint job where we want it nice and even. We actually want this to be kind of uneven and messy, and because these are supposed to look like kind of rusty hinges. So I'll just keep working around here. And then on these sides here, they're not really full hinges, but I just sort of paint out the shape of kind of a hinge here. And then same as before, I'll just kind of go on the sides here. And you'll see I kind of overlapped there, but that's fine. That'll just be kind of messy weathering. And I found after experimenting with a few of these that starting with the white undercoat here just kind of gave a better effect. It kind of looked like there was just more corrosion and stuff underneath the paint. Okay. All right, and so now that we've done the hinges here, I may just touch that up a little bit. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, just a paper towel here, and I'm going to take as much of the excess paint off of this brush here as I can. And what this technique is called dry brushing. And so basically what we're doing is we're removing a lot of the majority of the paint from the brush until it's kind of just almost like a kind of a powdery consistency here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start going into here and just lightly, without putting a lot of pressure, just kind of brushing over the texture. And so these treads, you'll notice they already are very bumpy, and we'd done a lot of work to make sure that these were pre-textured before we started casting them, or before we molded them. And so then it just makes it a lot easier so that when I'm doing this technique, I can kind of get in, and if you want it to be a little heavier in certain sections, you can kind of push a little harder. And yeah, I'm just sort of working my way around, working this beige in over the textured points, and it just makes the textures pop a little bit more. And then I make sure to get on the sides here as well, and I just try to hit them from every different angle here. And you'll notice, I'm not sure how it's picking up in the light here, but as I go around each pass, it's bringing out these textures. So it looks a little bit more textured. I'll do the same thing on the other side here. And this is why I save this stage kind of for after the hinges, because I want as little paint on the brush as possible. And then if I have a little excess paint here, I kind of rub it in. And so then I'll just kind of go around here. I'll just make sure I get any spots that I missed, maybe kind of randomize it a little bit, maybe do some edge highlighting by just sort of brushing these corners here. And I try to get the tops of these. These will probably get rubbed off after use, but I like to just get them covered. All right, and that's for the most part this first stage. And so next we'll just let this fully dry. It usually takes about 10-15 minutes for these to dry. And so I kind of do these in a big batch. And then when we come back, I'll put on the next coat. All right, now that the first coat is dried, now we're gonna move on to the brown stage. So I've already loaded up my palette here with our brown paint. And so now it's basically gonna be the exact same process. I'm just gonna go in now and start with the hinges. So I'm going to take our brown paint, and you'll notice as I go over the beige here, I'm just going to pat it on, and you'll notice the beige undercoat kind of comes through a little bit because our brown is just a little translucent. And I'm making sure just to kind of pat it on to give it kind of almost that textured look. And just like before, it's okay if it kind of smears in places or is a little heavier in other spots, because we want it to look messy. We want it to look a little uneven. And so we'll just like before, we're going to work around here and just sort of pat this on. One reason we let this fully dry is I found that because these are water-based paints, if you don't let it fully dry, and because we're not really using a primer underneath, I found that I was kind of smearing off the undercoat in my earlier versions. And so it's why I continue to just sort of pat it down. I'm trying not to smear it too much. Thankfully, these have fully dried, but so we wouldn't have too much of a problem. But even if you do, I found it does give it kind of a cool chipped look as well. So don't stress too much if it comes off. You could always redo it. So we'll work around the other side here now. Just pat this in. The other benefit of using a kind of a wide tipped brush like this is you're able to get a lot more surface coverage. And again, you'll see a lot of the texture popping now. Okay. All right, so now that that's there, we're gonna, just like before, I'm gonna take my brush here and just wipe off the excess paint so that we can dry brush on the rest of our brown here. And here I may leave it a little heavier than I did the first coat, just because we want it to look a little messy. And so here I'm actually gonna start with some of the crevices here where I think the dirt's kind of built up a little bit more. I'm gonna go in with just a little bit more pressure than before and just sort of push our paint into those spots. And it's kind of just up to you where you want the dirt and the mud to kind of collect. You may even see if you have a little excess paint on there and kind of smear it on a little bit. And if you want a little bit more, you could also just go back to your palette and just take a little bit and just wipe it off again. And then just go into those sections there and just right into those corners. And this one, we're going to be a little bit more generous with the paint because we want it to be, we don't want to overdo it because we don't want to hide all of the beige that we put on earlier. But we also want to use this stage as our kind of our opportunity to dirty it up and make it look a bit more worn. And so, again, I'll go onto the sides here. And I try to hit these from every angle to pick up on all the little bumps and details. And sometimes moving it out of like my little spotlight here and just using some of the room ambient light helps as well, because I can kind of see it in a different context. All right, and so once we've dirtied it up, I'm going to take just a little bit more, and now we can kind of just sort of almost spot onto certain spots here. We're just going to randomize it, so that way each one of these looks a little different. You could even go in with your finger here and kind of smear it around. And I'm going to load up my brush again with a bit more paint. I'm going to go into this kind of this pocket here, and I'm going to make sure that we really dirty up, because this is where a lot of, if you ever look at like concept art for Bali, there's a lot of dirt buildup and mud and muck in here because nobody's giving them a deep clean. And so we just go into these crevices here and we just make sure that we get as much muck in there. And you might even go in here and try to build it up a little bit as we get up here and find little spots where I think it should be a little dirtier as I go. And yeah, and you can kind of do this. It's easy to overdo it at this stage, so let's show a little bit of restraint. But yeah, you can kind of move it around in the light. And then once I'm satisfied, yeah, I'll just sort of call it quits. But yeah, for the most part, that's about how I've been weathering all of these. And so, yeah, I recommend just doing these in maybe batches of 5 or 6 at a time. And that way it gives each stage enough time to dry before you move on to the next stage. But yeah, thank you so much.